Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that encourages discussion in our community on today's local and global issues. Now your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, author, professor, and nationally known sports economist, Dr. Kevin Quinn.
Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College. Our special guest is Darren Rovell, a sports business analyst for ESPN. We'll discuss his job in Bristol and the economics of sports. Darren, welcome to St. Norbert College and welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is exciting.
So you're obviously the best known name in all of sports business journalism. I mean, it's not even close. Why is it interesting? I mean, why does anybody actually care about sports business?
Well, I went back and at some point, I think it was probably 1987, that's when SportsCenter felt that aside from just saying this guy signed, they would tell you how much he signed for. And I'm not sure why that happened, but fans started to get interested in the salaries. And then all of a sudden we saw some point, maybe I would say 95, 96, we saw that fans felt like they couldn't be the fan that they needed to be if they didn't understand the economics of sports, their owner's capacity to spend, the salary cap. And they would lose at the water cooler. You're not as big of a fan if you are going to propose some dumb trade that wouldn't have made sense, that doesn't match up with base year compensation or doesn't. And so I think that's really what changed and why it's interesting. I mean, I know why I find it interesting, but I think the masses find it interesting now because in order to be the best fan you can be, you have to understand all aspects of the game, and that includes business.
Well, you know, I think you're right on the money with that. Sports talk radio really took off in the 90s. I mean, it had been around before that, but it wasn't the same.
And I'm a child of growing up with WFAN, which is the first 24-hour radio station. I actually used to wake up between midnight and 3 a.m. to listen to this guy Steve Summers, Captain Midnight. My mom would wonder why the hell I was so tired when I went to sleep at 8 o'clock. She also put Post-it notes on my door whether the Mets won or lost, and I didn't have the heart to tell her until I was 16 that every night I actually knew because I listened to the radio.
So you chose Northwestern, though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you chose their, not the business school,
right,
but the journalism school,
right? Well, first, I was a theater major. I was not a journalism major. I was a theater major, and I was in operas and plays and musical theater, and that was one avenue that I was considering going. And I think I was at some point I was good enough to make it in some sense on a Broadway kind of stage. But my sophomore year, I basically came to this conclusion from an economic standpoint, as kind of jokingly, that there was just not sustainability in that career. You could be great, you could go all the way up to the top, and then you'd be a waiter 6 months later. So I knew I loved sports, I knew that I had an obsession with sports, and I felt like I had a good understanding as to how to develop some sort of niche so that I wouldn't toil in small markets. And my father had a degree in biophysics and biochemistry and a marketing degree, and he kind of had a niche in that way because the scientists who are in the labs don't talk to the marketing people in drug companies, right. And that kind of gave me the idea of having some sort of niche. And at the time I was reading the business pages as much as the sports pages and came to this, well, no one from a nationwide standpoint is talking about the business of sports. Why don't I read every single book on the business of sports, teach myself it? And then my junior year had a sports business radio show where that was the eureka moment for me when I was getting every single person I wanted and realized that everyone wants to talk to athletes and they don't want to talk to you. No one is talking to the business people, and you asked your Rose and asked one question. Well, that's it for our hour show.
You managed to get a job right out of school with ESPN.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Well, some of the credit is to luck, and if you read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, they talk about Steve Jobs and Bill Gates being born in 1958 or something like that, same year. And the reason why that's important is because they are there for the first computers that come into libraries and they can tinker with computers. For me, you know, I walked into school in 1996 saying, do I really need email? And then walked out with like the boom of .com where, you know, you could take chances, where ESPN had ESPN.com and their own budget and they can take chances. So some of it was luck. and some of it was just, the idea that I could convince them rather cheaply to have a sports business reporter. I remember, so in my job interview, they were looking for an intern. I said, just give me 10 minutes. I know you don't need a sports business reporter. You say you don't, but I printed out the front page of ESPN.com, and 3 out of the 7 headlines have a $ sign in it, and it's all written by AP. You own none of it. If you're the worldwide leader in sports, then why is it okay not to be the worldwide leader in sports business? So then, luckily, again, luck. It was not an HR person, because if it was an HR person, it would be we are hiring an intern, and that's what it is. And I'm sorry, it was an executive. And then that executive said, okay, let's get you to Bristol. And I interviewed and got the job.
I mean, you must have been starstruck. I mean, I know I would have been.
It was pretty crazy. I couldn't believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that was in some ways that was really kind of the
that was my dream. What do I do?
Now
my
what?
dream. I'm 21 and I get a job at ESPN.
Well, I mean, I remember though, because as a sports economist, I'm like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And for some reason, I just had the impression that you had been around for a long time. I mean, I had no idea that you were freshly out of school.
Yeah, and I would say, you'd think like, oh, you're celebrating, this is great, but it was a lot of pressure because I wasn't ready for the speed of the internet. Now I can write a story in 15 minutes and I can, break 2 or 3 stories, very easily. But back then, I remember my first article, took a week and a half, and that week and a half's like forever. You're an internet writer, so it was. I don't recall, being so starstruck about it, other than like this is a responsibility and I can't screw this up and I want to have a long career, so I gotta develop my sources and build it.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that just like back in the day, the athletes didn't want to talk to reporters and the business people did. I'm guessing the business people are very circumspect about what they're.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's different. You're reporting what's going on in boardrooms. You're not reporting what's going on the field. So you don't really have a story to tell until you get these sources. I do remember I did have this fear that I was going to run out of stories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because I just, at some point, and I had so many ideas in the beginning, but then, you realize that you just got to wait for the first part of the story to develop what happened and then to tell the business of it. And it helped to be at ESPN because you find out that what happened a lot faster than other people, which then gives you a jump on doing the second part of the story.
One of the things I found is if you understand the business of the sports, you actually can see 2 or 3 moves ahead about what's going to happen. It's not a surprise when your favorite player is cut because you understand the contractual situation.
Right, that's true.
So you have had an opportunity to interview some of the most famous athletes of the last 50 years and the business people associated with them. So talk about some of those interviews. I mean, Tiger Woods and others. Talk about who were the greatest interviews, who were the worst interviews?
There's only one interview where I kind of, really, it's very difficult not to be starstruck, and that's Michael Jordan. I mean, his head is perfectly shaved. It's the only time I've ever wanted an earring. He's got the tailored suits. I mean, he's got a glow around him that no one has, and that's probably because he was of my generation. Tiger is always like, it's very uptight. Tiger's interviewing Tiger has always been kind of like an uptight thing, and it's not necessarily fun. It's fun when it's over. But I like the guys. I like the challenge of loosening guys up. Like an Andrew Luck, comes in and he's a little bit stiff, but by the end, you ask him the right questions. I think that there are guys that appreciate business, and you can tell right away. Like, Kobe asked for my phone number 6 years ago because he said, hey, we do this once a year. You sit down with me, but I, enjoy chatting with you. We should chat offline soon. I'm like, you're asking for my phone number? Okay. So that, there's a group of like 10 athletes, high-profile athletes who I talk to offline, just who I really enjoy. And that might be, even the better part of it, things that are not necessarily on air. But it's been fun. I mean, the owners, obviously, Cuban's a crazy man, and that's and that's been a lot of fun. There are surprises. There's always something that I've always learned to ask. The last question I ask is there something I haven't asked you? Because every once in a while there's something that comes out. You think you know the story. Your editor thinks you know the story, and then something changes a little bit. So I've had a lot of fun. It's been great.
So how do you prepare for an interview? Let's say you're going to meet with Jerry Jones, or you're going to meet with Michael Jordan. What's your process by which you think about what you want to ask?
So first is just research, just knowing everything, 50 to 100 pages of printed out research. And then you have to figure out, well, what's my story here and what's the order? I've learned over time that the order is very important. The order changes answers. If you don't ease into something when someone needs some comfort, you're going to blow the whole interview. And I kind of say that there's not bad answers, there's just bad interviewing. And that kind of puts the burden on you, but it is a lot of figuring out how are you going to get to the big point. You have to know where the crescendo of your interview is.
So let me ask, what was the toughest interview you ever had to do? Anybody drop the mic and walk on you?
No, although I did do an interview with then Bruce Jenner on Vioxx, when Vioxx was called uniquely dangerous. And I'm not sure, I think in retrospect, it wasn't as dangerous as the people that it led to heart attacks, and I think there was some walking back by the people who did the study. But I had interviewed him. He had agreed to an interview because on the premise of, and I basically said, do you feel bad that you were the spokesman for a product that led people to die? Leading question. And he actually did pretty well. But the most difficult interview was probably my franchise documentary for CNBC, which I really loved doing, when I sat down with the CEO of Cold Stone after we had called them the worst franchise in America, essentially, from an ownership standpoint. And he was sitting next to his lawyer, and there were maybe 7 other lawyers in the room for the interview.
Right.
And that was probably the most crazy interview I had done.
Well, let's talk about your time at CNBC. I mean, you made a big splash at ESPN, and CNBC said, "Oh, we should be covering this, and we're going to get that guy."
Right.
So the culture had to be completely different.
It was. I mean, I did go from being the geek at the sports network to the cool guy at the business network. Hey, you get to do sports. People don't say that at ESPN, but yeah, that was it was different. But the fact that I was around other reporters that were business reporters first. I always considered myself a business reporter who happened to do sports, not the other way around. And so it was a little bit of a culture shock, but it was exciting in its own way. I mean, and I was there from 2006, but first of all, thank God I wasn't in Beijing when the market crashed. I mean, in another 2 months, if the market really crashed, I would have been just twiddling my thumbs like Nero in Beijing. I mean, but yeah, I mean, for 2008, 2009, 2010, to see anchors sleeping on the floor,
Wow.
in sleeping bags at work, because it was just so crazy to see billions of dollars in value, in stocks just crashing. I mean. But it was a great thing. And what was interesting is that CNBC and ESPN kind of have the same viewers in that they feel like, it's a family. I think even more CNBC because people watch for hours and hours and hours and don't ever disconnect. So the difference was when people saw me in the street with ESPN, they'd say hello and maybe want to take a picture with CNBC. They wanted to hug me, so it was kind of different.
Yeah, I know. My mom, in her later years, that's what she did. She had CNBC on all day long.
Yeah.
Well, you did some great work there. Including, you got an Emmy, actually.
I got an Emmy for election coverage for NBC. I had been doing some election coverage, just chipping in 2008. And I was in, I think, somewhere in Pennsylvania in a bowling alley, and Brian Williams went to me for about 27 seconds, and I described the scene and picked up a nice piece of hardware for that. But without my contribution, I don't think it could have been that great of a broadcast.
Well, I have a feeling a lot of that, a lot of the awards that folks get in whatever profession, they're recognized for this, and they're thinking that's really not the best work I did. It was something else. But you did a lot of other stuff there. You did speaking of Michael Jordan, documentary about Nike.
Yep. So
talk a little bit about why was that an interesting story. And that was some time ago, so talk about maybe what's different now than back then.
Yeah, well, for me, I felt that the main part of the piece was that Phil Knight had still not addressed his labor mistake, although they had made some changes, and he had never addressed that. And so that was a non-negotiable part of the deal with Nike. I had to get Phil Knight on camera, and I had to get him to basically apologize or say what he needed to say, and he did. And I also needed us to go to one of these places and see for ourselves as good as we could whether things were rectified or not. So we went to Vietnam. Unbeknownst to Nike, we had a producer out there 3 weeks ahead of time, standing outside the factory who spoke Vietnamese, talking to people. And we gave them 24 hours to open 3 of the 8 factories and to take a look and talk to people. And we found some stuff, but at the end of the day, it was hard to determine whether these people saw American TV and were making stuff up and this is their way out. But for the most part, it was I think activists automatically recite those stories, and we had a greater burden. And I think what was tough to tell, that part of the story, is a living wage. Is it fair? I think people impose their economic values of, they're only making 45 cents. Well, that's a living wage maybe in Vietnam. Or yes, Nike goes to these places because it gives them an economic advantage, because there are no unions. We understand that. But is it automatically unfair? What is fair? How do you decide that? And so that was a fascinating thing to look at. It's very easy to say, it's slave labor, it's unfair wages, but you have to put yourself in their shoes. And I think I was proud of what we did there. We got nominated for an Emmy.
And so how is it different now? That was 2004, is that right?
2007 or 8, yeah.
Okay. Well, how is it different now? Is there more awareness? Is Nike more sensitive to the consumer reaction?
Oh yeah, Nike knows that how costly it is. Although there are still issues, they still don't own, they don't own all the factories, which is hard because they are, just kind of contractors in a sense. But they totally understand that just because they're contractors and that gives them an arm's length distance, that doesn't mean that gets them out of things. And so they've moved some things around. I think in some places they haven't always gone to the cheapest place anymore because they've seen trouble ahead of time.
So in addition to the Nike piece that you did, you also did pieces on NASCAR and the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. So I'm guessing that had to be kind of an interesting thing for a young guy to be doing.
So how did I do that and talk to my wife about it?
Yeah,
that's always well, it's like this.
I'd like to hear this story.
If my wife went on a date with Brad Pitt, I would not be concerned. If she went on a date with my neighbor, I would be concerned. It's kind of the same thing. I'm going with 5 models to Chile. Nothing's happening between us. Okay, so, but this was a chance to, obviously I've kind of been focused on, I can pick what I want, but I wanted to get something that has a tremendous amount of buzz, and I wanted to talk about it from a business side that really hasn't been talked about before. What happens when someone's swimsuit is on the pages? How does Sports Illustrated, which is being challenged by the media environment, how do they deal with making money? And why is the swimsuit issue the franchise that it is? So it was a great experience. It could have been, again, it's like these things could have been widgets, but it's just more interesting that it's swimsuit models.
Well, I mean, and that's it. And for some people, peeling away, the stage and looking behind at the Boilermakers and that make business. There are some that would think that you're kind of ruining.
Yeah,
that,
there's actually a lot. I had been tone deaf to those people actually. Like, now that with social media you see this. BuzzFeed came to me and said, we're doing a 6,000 word piece on why people hate you. And I'm like, okay, all right. I'm like, I'll cooperate, because you're going to write it anyway. And their conclusion was basically that people are into sports because of passion. And I guess, I am standing there on Twitter just as someone hits the ball and, putts into the hole, and I'm gonna tell you right away how much money he made or how much money he lost, and I'm coming into their moment, and they don't like that. And I that had never occurred to me. All I had was I watch it like I'm trained to watch it, like I trained myself to watch it. and I go, and I'm not aware of the environment. But with social media, obviously you become much more aware.
Well, you are literally one of the best known people on Twitter. I mean,
I was there pretty early. I believed in it. I think a lot of people said, what happens if it's not the next big thing? You're so all in. Well, then I'll go to the next thing. And it turned out that Twitter was, I think, what I thought it was going to be. Interestingly enough, I got into Twitter just from a standpoint of I was so overwhelmed. In order to get the second part of the story, you have to get the first part of the story. And so I used to read sportspages.com, which is just sports sections, and just click all over the place. And then I went to blog lines, and it was taking me 2.5, 3 hours to go through every day so I can get the secondary part of the story. And Twitter was not a time suck. It was actually a time saver for me. And so it wasn't necessarily in the beginning in March of 2009 when I got on it. It wasn't about dissemination and building my brand. It was about just trying to deal with the enormity of my everyday work life.
So what makes something tweet-worthy? In other words, what is it that you say, okay, people will want to hear this?
I just think it's interesting enough, or it's, sometimes it's just yelling in the world's greatest sports bar. They're in front of their computer, their iPads, or their phones, and so there's a whole process. There's a lot of things make a tweet. It's newsworthy. It's funny. It's just yelling in the sports bar. There's a lot of things, and I've purchased a lot of old media because I think it's incredibly cool to kind of go back, and people love being nostalgic. So I've bought thousands of old publications that I go through and, I'm going to put out something today on concession prices in 1976 and 77. And really, just people love that stuff.
We talk about the teams as brands and how they're sort of the core nugget that's going to drive a lot of businesses in the future. But you yourself have created a personal brand. In fact, in some ways, have defined what a personal brand is all about in the early 21st century. Talk about what that means to you and why did you do that?
I think a lot of it just came out of just feeling like I have to. Every day, thinking that someone's going to beat you or, kind of get into your space. And I think as building a niche, you kind of want to own an area so that when people think of they think of this. I mean, that's what developing a personal brand is. So I don't know if it was ever a plan, a PowerPoint or anything like that, but what is very funny is, so one of the examples is, yesterday I gave to the ESPN news desk that the Deflategate had lasted almost 7 times longer than the Chris Humphries, Kim Kardashian marriage. And somehow, and I did not put that out on Twitter, and somehow Adam Schefter put that out, I guess maybe because it hit a newswire or something like that. And someone responded to him, never go full Rovell. And so that, to me, that meant that I have branded myself into the business / ridiculously insignificant stat category, which is great and fun, and people can make fun of it. But yes, I'm the guy who has the crazy stat, or the dumb stat, whatever it is, and I've branded myself enough so that even when you don't even know it's mine, it is mine, but you say it's mine. So listen, I don't think it was a plan, but certainly the idea of being all over in every facet of sports business, and owning areas like stadium food and even kind of getting into the beer, the alcohol standpoint, I think that's just, it is what is me. I think the biggest part about building a personal brand for me is that it's authentic, it's genuine. I'm not building something that I'm not, which I think there are people who build personal brands that are, just whatever they want to construct. Mm-hmm. I am authentically me, and when I say something childish or amateurish or whatever, that I have a sense of humor that I've had since I was 8 years old. So if you're gonna, tell me, oh, that's immature or whatever. Guess what? I'm going to say it anyway, and that's part of kind of the development of developing something and knowing that you are who you are. It's easier to have a personal brand when you don't have to think about what your brand is.
Right. It's like my dad once told me that if you don't lie, you don't have to have as good a memory.
Yes, that's a good line.
Now, with that though comes a certain publicness of your life.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would say I can't believe as a journalist you would never think that you would. And part of this, I think, is the interest in media, and especially sports media. But you would never think that I would have as public of a life as I have. It's crazy. There's a lot of rules that I've set up around me because I have to. That, frankly, if you would have told me in the beginning this is what it's going to be like, I wouldn't have bowed out, but I would say that's pretty ridiculous. I'm actually not in this for the fame of it all, and never thought that I would be kind of at least this type of famous, which is not like it's strange. It's really strange.
And of course, with that, people who don't even know you, who have never met you, feel like they have no compunction taking pot shots at you, just because they think they know you.
Right. I will say that no one has ever said they hate what I do and they hate me to my face. But 200 times a day, there are people who it ranges from, delete your account to die in a fire, essentially.
Well, we have a couple minutes left, and I want to ask you a couple things that I think you're in a unique position to be able to see. So, what do you think is the most important trend in sports business right now? What's the big picture macro thing that we're going to look back 25 years from now and go, we should have seen that?
Well, I think teams as brands, like a team owning that they're not going to license any technology or be part of any technology that they also don't own. So that's one. They're going to own, each team is going to have tentacles where they're going to own accelerators, esports team, everything's branched out. And like the Packers, every team is going to finally build some sort of area around their stadium. Some will work, some won't. So I think that's one. And I think two, the other thing to really watch is just the volatile space of ticketing. It is crazy because we still haven't had the legal world determine whether we own the ticket or the team is leasing us the right to a ticket. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And teams are going to try to get control of both the primary and the resale, and that's starting. And there's going to be a lot of friction in the next 5 to 10 years between fans and teams, and that's going to be probably the most dynamic area to cover.
Do you ever worry that the perception on the part of fans that teams and sports leagues are just so greedy that they're going to lose interest?
No, because having read publications historically, I know that's been since the 30s. They've been talking about greed, and it seems to be a moving target. And I think that ultimately teams believe that passion will supersede all, and it does.
It does. And of course, I'm now going to steal this. Is there anything I didn't ask you?
Oh, there you go.
I can learn.
No, it's a lot of fun. I mean, it is hard every day to wake up every day and know what you have to do, and the pressure of, I have a schedule out for the next 2.5 months of things that I have to hit. But it's exciting. I've been doing it for like 16 years now. And I think I'm going to make it at least 5 more. I mean, but it is tiring, but it's also, dream come true every day.
Well, I mean, with this kind of success, you can retire and star in that opera.
I can't retire at 41. I'm not that successful, but.
But Darren, thank you very much for coming to St. Norbert College. We appreciate that. I hope you've all enjoyed this as much as we have. Until next time, I'm Kevin Quinn. Best wishes for good conversations from St. Norbert College.